We've got $1 billion plus backlog in street repairs. Is Mayor Faulkner's plan to fix San Diego's crumbling infrastructure realistic? Massive solar arrays are cropping up in the Imperial Valley and other desert counties. What are the environmental costs of big solar, and who's quietly benefiting? And some San Diego cases illustrate the problem with shaken baby prosecutions. Innocent people can be locked up for decades. I'm Mark Sauer. The KPBS Roundtable starts now. Welcome to our discussion of the week's top stories. I'm Mark Sauer. And joining me at the KPBS Roundtable today, reporter Liam Dillon of Voice of San Diego. Hi, Liam.
Hi, Mark.
Good to see you back. Reporter Lisa Halverstadt, also a Voice of San Diego. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Good to have you here. Thank you. And Dana Littlefield, legal affairs reporter for the San Diego Union Tribune. Good to see you again, Dana.
Hi, Mark.
Well, the tab to repair San Diego streets, sidewalks, and other crumbling infrastructure could run to as much as $5 billion. That's serious money. Yet Mayor Kevin Faulkner's plan to finance repairs of 1,000 miles of streets doesn't come near that amount, and it faces legal challenges as well. Here he is on Evening Edition on KPBS explaining a 5-year plan.
What are we going to be doing for the next 5 years? But even longer than that. That's why we're doing, not only our street assessments, but our sidewalks, our street lights, our facilities condition. And I'm spending a lot of time on what I like to call repairing the city's repair program, which means how are we looking at providing value for the dollars and efficiencies and making sure that we're spending the dollars that we have much more wisely and getting projects across the finish line.
All right.
Well, Liam, let's start with the scope of this thing, and it's
Sure.
a big range. We're talking about $1 billion, $5 billion. That's some serious money.
Sure, it really depends on what you count. If you're just counting streets, it's a certain number. If you're counting streets and then water pipes and sewer pipes, it's another amount of money. But really, again, it depends on all the things that you want to take into account. But the city has a lot of things it needs to maintain and fix.
And isn't there, they look at this and they try to get some snapshot in time. Isn't a survey due or was due here right around now?
Sure, so they look at, this is what the mayor just said is on the spot here about condition assessments. They'll take a look, hey, every few years, what are the state of our sidewalks, what are the state of our streets, state of our pipes, things like that. And then once that happens, we're able to come to a number.
All right, no, so let's talk about specifics on that plan.
Yeah.
What does he want to do, and how's he going to pay for it?
Right, so he is mainly, as far as the assets that are under the city control, so putting aside sort of water and sewer for the moment, he's saying mainly I just want to take natural revenue growth that's coming into the city. So the city gets taxes every year and revenue that beyond what the city had the previous year. He says I'm going to take half of that and throw that towards infrastructure. And then he also says that he wants to borrow some money as well without having a public vote, which would add another minimal amount to the repair plan. The problem is, of course, is that none of this is not even close, and people have known this for years, that none of this sort of things that he's talking about, these carrots, are even close to coming to the full extent of the problem.
Okay, and so we've got, as we noted at the top there, we've got this 5-year plan, $100 million, and again, we'll get to that in a minute, that's right. Even subject of litigation.
Sure.
And that only gets us $500 million. So as you say, we're a long way, even if we, say that that money will be able to glom onto and use for repair.
The big problem here is this is no longer a secret. Back in 2010, 2011, when we started to come to grips with the extent of this problem, there was a legitimate sort of thing to say, hey, wait a second, we don't know how bad our streets are, we don't know how bad our sidewalks are, we don't know how bad our storm drains are, so we have to evaluate them, because if you throw a bunch of money at us, we wouldn't know what to repair first, second, or third. Mm-hmm. Well, they've done all that, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're at the point now where there's very few cans left to kick. Either you're going to get more money for this, or they're going to keep crumbling, and you're going to need to keep people accountable for their failures to do something about it.
That's right. In this 5 years, every day, month that goes by, we're getting more needed repairs. It's still crumbling.
That's right.
As we go. Now, these estimates, by the way, do they include Balboa Park? As we've talked on this show and elsewhere, of course, a lot of stories on the problems there.
Sure. Some of the examinations of facilities do, and so
Okay.
these numbers are beginning to come into the system.
Okay. Now, this plan to borrow the $100 or $100 million, that
Right.
is, a year for 5 years. The independent budget analyst, what's her take on that?
Well, the problem is when you borrow this kind of money, you're obligating the city to pay money back over 30 years. And so without having a dedicated new revenue source to do this, you're just simply eating up money for the next 3 decades that you can't use on other things. And so she has called the system unsustainable because, again, A, you don't fix the problem, and B, you're locking yourself into not being able to do things 2 decades from now.
Now, street repair, at least it's not a sexy thing. We had terrible fires here in '07. We had a big public vote here. We're going to raise a bunch of money and get more for firefighting. That didn't pass right after the fires. A couple of thousand houses lost. Can we get some big chunk of money here voted on for street repair? Is that likely?
Well, some pollsters have actually said in recent time that it would be possible for something that would focus on infrastructure. There's a lot of interest here, and I don't know about when you guys get together with your friends, but even the regular people who normally are totally against taxes are saying, my gosh, my street needs to be repaired, my sidewalks are horrible.
Yeah, we're jarring the fillings loose driving down some of these streets. Now, Liam, you surveyed, we had this Faulkner Infrastructure Group, and these were folks from a variety of places. First of all, tell us about that group. Who were they and what were they?
This is when he was coming into office, and he says, hey, I'm going to find my pals who know about infrastructure. Pals, tell me what do I need to do. And so they came up with a plan, and then when the mayor sort of put out his plan, I went back and asked them, hey, friends of the mayor, do you think the mayor's doing enough to fix roads and fix infrastructure? And almost to a person, the answer was no. They're not. And again, this is when he first got into office more than a year ago, and he hasn't changed course. And so when even your friends are saying you're doing something wrong, it's a sign you're doing something wrong.
Yeah. And so, again, the whole idea is we need a massive amount of money here. And you start looking at some of the other things.
Right.
We could talk about the airport, which has been going on, I don't know, for decades, looking at a new airport here, and the commerce and the money, it's billions it's costing, supposedly, in business each year. Of course, the Chargers Stadium is still sitting out there. Any number of other things the city has to do, pension obligations and all. I mean, at some point, it seems like you're going to have some big pot of new money here.
Well, he has 2 choices. One, he has to get behind a pot of new money, or 2, he has to tell us in real terms how he's going to do it without that. And he's avoided that, while at the same time promoting ballot measures for a new football stadium. $300 million in public money that we don't have would go to the football team. A new convention center, which is a tax increase to pay for the convention center. It's, again, extremely troubling that things that people deal with every day, their streets, their sidewalks, their storm drains, pipes, get shunted behind things that sort of billionaires play with, football stadiums and convention centers.
Right. You've got, 10 or 12 football games a year, maybe more if you add in the college games, and then maybe a Super Bowl once every 15 years, and it's debatable how much that brings to town. But we drive on these streets every day. We use this stuff all the time.
Absolutely. And again, he's shown extreme reluctance and running out, in my view, really running out of excuses. Because we've known about this problem. This is not new. This is not a surprise. To put together something to solve it, he's relying on the city council to do it. They're not really doing it. Mark Kersey, the head of the infrastructure committee, says he'll have something soon, but he's been saying that for a while. And we're really running out of time to do this in a real comprehensive way.
Now, the county is kind of on a parallel track. They're considering an idea of a bond initiative as well.
So this would be broader through the Region Association of Governments, SANDAG. They're potentially considering a quality of life measure in 2016 as well, which would include a tax increase. The interesting thing about that is SANDAG has shown that you actually can pass tax increases in San Diego. Transnet passed roughly a decade ago, and that was a 2/3 tax increase that passed. And the reason why that did is everybody got behind it, and there wasn't a lot of infighting, and everyone was on the same page and pushed it forward. And that's really not what we've seen here. The mayor is still, again, well, I don't think we need anything, when his own numbers and his own friends show that to be not true.
Well, not a lot of Democrats coming forth yet to challenge the mayor next year. Maybe he's vulnerable on an issue like this. Of course, you'd have to come up with a solution and try and solve it.
And, you have city council members continuing to sort of whine about why isn't there doing anything. Well, you can do something. I mean, the only person who's really doing anything is related to a tax increase right now is Corey Briggs, the activist attorney who's saying, listen, I'm going to raise hotel room taxes by 5%, and that'll take care of everything.
Yeah.
But it's it's something.
Well, we'll see. I'm sure we're going to be doing a lot more stories on this. We're going to move on now. In progressive California, the state mandate that utilities provide 1/3 of their energy from renewable sources by 2020 is widely seen as a noble thing. Solar power leads the way with a boom in places like Imperial County, but critics say not all solar projects are good for the environment. Lisa, let's start with this report from the Carnegie Institution that's come out now. Give us the high points of the conclusions there.
Well, I would say the big takeaway is that many of these big solar projects that you think of just covering acres and acres, those are actually on farmland and on more natural landscapes, not necessarily on land that has previously been developed or has already been built on. So this report actually found that only 15% of these large-scale solar projects are on compatible land that's already been developed.
Okay. Now, if you, and we'll get to a lot of these details in a moment, but if, we all drive out east here into the desert, maybe you go up into the high sea area, head to Las Vegas, and you think, boy, there's a lot of wide open sand and nothing here and a whole lot of sunshine. Well, what's wrong with putting these giant solar arrays out there, according to these folks?
Well, those big desert landscapes are filled with different species that have not interacted with humans and are, essentially to be protected. And environmentalists have stood up again and again and really fought projects. And so developers of solar projects actually tell me that they've had to learn from that and instead are looking to other types of locations for solar projects.
And they're saying, and of course, one of the things is you transmit this power for a long way. It's inefficient. You lose some of that power. There's a degradation, if that's the right word, of the power as it goes over these long transmission lines. So they're saying, it's kind of like the smart growth thing, where you have it dense, you have a lot of rooftops, you have landfills, you have things that are already there, already developed, and put the panels there, as other places like Germany, which may lead the world in solar installations, they're doing that first instead of these remote areas, right?
Well, and that's another point in this report, is that essentially a lot of these solar projects are far away from existing transmission infrastructure. And that's definitely something that we've seen in San Diego Gas and Electric's approach to getting more renewables, because they invested in the Sunrise Power Link to connect San Diego customers with a great amount of wind and solar power out in Imperial County, but that infrastructure wasn't there before. They had to build that, and so there were additional costs associated with that, and there were a lot of environmental and ratepayer groups who were quick to point that out and really attack the project for that reason.
Okay, now who owns these big solar farms? Are they going on public land? Are they buying private land, or is it kind of a mix? Or?
Well, out of town, usually solar developers are purchasing these projects after they're built. They go through just a series of different ownerships throughout the process. But a lot of the land, actually, especially in Imperial County, which I've studied the most, is privately owned and is being leased out. Or say that there's someone who had been farming that, decides that they don't want to anymore, they'll actually sell the property to the solar developer.
Now, what's the impact of this report? Is it likely to slow the building of these solar projects out in the desert?
Well, there's a lot going on in this area. I wouldn't want to say that a single report could make that change, but I can say that the industry as a whole has really been changing a lot after this initial push for a lot of renewables.
Okay. Now, you touched on this a moment ago, but I wanted to move to a related topic here, which is these environmental groups. They've filed several lawsuits to battle big solar on behalf of farmers and the environment. So what were those suits based on? What was kind of the deal there?
Well, the law that they really relied on for these suits is called the California Environmental Quality Act. And essentially, called CEQA. And really the purpose of that law is to force governments and developers to say, hey, here are the potential environmental impacts associated with our project, and then to allow people in the community to say, we don't like that, or we think that this is going to be affecting the environment in a way that you're not really taking care of. Please work on that. So what happened here, though, is that we had two nonprofits, Backcountry Against Dumps and Protect Our Communities Foundation, which filed several lawsuits against solar projects, saying that there were violations of CEQA, but also of the county's general plan, which they said really kept or should have kept the county from putting solar projects on agricultural land. Okay.
And were they very successful in stopping or modifying some of these projects?
Well, the groups are just adamant that their lawsuits did result in changes to these projects. But I spent a lot of time reviewing public documents, watching hearings, reviewing even announcements after the solar projects were built, and I really couldn't find any evidence that these lawsuits were the sole reason for changes in these projects. And in the cases that I did see big changes, it actually happened before the lawsuits were filed, or there was a power purchase agreement, which is how the power is sold to SDG&E or another utility. There were dynamics of those that might have shifted the project. Say if you only are able to sell power coming from, say, 200 acres, and you have a 500-acre plot, you might only develop that 200 acres for now. So it's hard to say for sure that their lawsuits had any environmental results.
And yet there's the settlements. There's some big money involved in these settlements, right?
So
how does that work?
That is the result that we know about. The most apparent result of all of these lawsuits is about $17 million in cash settlements, which are paid out as projects get developed. Now, about $6 million of that is supposed to go to farmers who were in some way going to be affected by these projects. But the two environmental groups and their attorneys took about half of that total money, $17 million.
Okay, so and that's the way the process works under CEQA when you file those lawsuits.
Well, the CEQA is supposed to be about environmental changes. And here in this case, the thing that we know about is these settlements. There weren't any public announcements after the lawsuit saying, wow, we're so proud that we've saved all of this land from solar. Of course, the groups are now saying that they did reduce these projects, but because of those settlements, they can't talk about it. Okay. That's what they say.
All right, if that's a catch-22, perhaps. And you also wrote about labor. Labor got involved, and they've used CEQA to their own effect. Explain that.
Well, labor has a lot of interest in these solar projects because they bring a lot of jobs, and labor is always interested, if they can, in getting a project labor agreement, which basically, which basically says you're going to pay a certain amount and you're going to hire local workers. And so one union in particular, the laborers union, had filed suit against two projects. And it was interesting because I contacted this labor union and asked them about the lawsuits that they filed against these two projects, why these? And in the course of that conversation, I had asked, did you have a project labor agreement with these two projects that you sued over? And the union leader admitted that they did not. And then I said, I'd really like to learn more about the reasons behind these lawsuits. He promised that he would get back to me, that we would talk about it. Never could get in touch with him after that.
Okay, so a little dicey on that side too here. It's just a lack of transparency here, Liam. I mean,
well, this is, in my view, a real paradigmatic example of when people say they have problems with this environmental law, what they mean by that. The law, again, is supposed to help the environment, but what we see in this case and what we see in cases from around the state are a lot of diverse, different interests getting things that have nothing to do with the environment, whether it's money or whether pushing for labor agreements, or we've even seen in other places, one gas station is suing using CEQA their rival gas station across the street because they don't want that competition from a new gas station. And so this law is being used to great effect by folks who don't really care about the environment, or maybe a better way to put it is the effects are, they can stop their competitors, they can try to wield it to force people to get into labor agreements, and they can get a lot of money as a result.
Unintended consequences. Well, we'll look forward to more great reporting on that, because there's a lot of questions here, and maybe on the legislative side as well with CEQA. All right, we will move on now. Among the most difficult and tragic cases in our criminal justice system are those involving injuries to babies. Parents and caregivers have long been prosecuted on the theory that babies with certain brain injuries must have been victims of violent shaking or other physical abuse. But Dana, your excellent story on the UT, it says that these have always been difficult things to come back and prove, but a lot of these assumptions now are coming under real close scrutiny.
Yes. So essentially, early on, the idea of shaken baby syndrome was that term was coined sometime in the 1970s, and from then on, let's say around the mid-90s, during that whole time span, it seemed that the philosophy essentially with shaken baby was that if you had these three types of head injuries, that it definitely pointed to abuse, because these types of injuries couldn't be caused in any other kind of way.
Accidental way. So
Exactly.
you're looking at a criminal case versus a tragic accident. Well, let's talk about specifically that triad. So a baby presents, we're talking about a what exactly?
Well, we're talking about subdural hemorrhage, so bleeding on the brain. You're also talking about bleeding on the back of the eyes, so retinal hemorrhages. And you're also talking about brain swelling. Those are the three typical types of brain injuries that you would see in a case of abuse. That's what doctors have described.
And so, of course, that theory goes from the medical side into the criminal justice system where typically nobody's there. Maybe this happened at 3 o'clock in the morning. There's a baby and a caregiver or a parent, and the accusation comes out of these how these injuries are manifested when the medical folks see them or a pathologist sees them. Right?
Yes. So what you've got is a situation where in some cases, you have a situation where these three types of injuries are seen in an infant or small child, or maybe not even all three, but some combination of those three issues.
Part of the triad is present.
Exactly, yes. And in the absence of any other type of outward injury, let's say bruises on the body or rib fractures or other skeletal injuries, that would be, in some people's opinion, maybe a more clear sign of abuse. Doctors have had to make determinations. They've had to look at those injuries and say, is it likely that these injuries were to happen by accident, or is it more likely that it's abuse? Now, over time, in more recent years, there have been studies that come out that say, well, maybe this triad can be caused by something else, something other than abuse. So you've got a couple of things that could happen there. You've got short falls. So that was actually the argument used previously about these types of head injuries, is that you would more likely see them in, let's say, a car crash or a fall from a great height. But there has been some evidence that a shorter fall, like something you'd see on a playground, would actually cause similar injuries. And there are other factors.
Or maybe a child climbs up on a couch. I'm referring, of course, to the Ken Marsh case we'll get to here. And the argument was from the defendant there that fell off, caught the head on a stone-raised hearth, and that caused a fatal injury. And the docs will say, no, that can't happen. It's got to be like a 2-story fall. Big fall, as you said, not these short falls, or out of a high chair onto a stone floor. That can't cause a fatal injury here. Where lay people might say through common sense, well, it could.
Well, you've got a number of factors at play here. So you've got that type of fall. The child may also have some kind of pre-existing medical condition that would make him or her more susceptible to that type of injury. So let's say there's a blood clotting disorder or some type of infection. These types of conditions, some have referred to as medical mimics. So these are things that you look at them on a CT scan or on an MRI, and they may look like abuse, but not actually be abuse.
Now, once these cases are charged and the prosecutions, the prosecutors are pretty successful, are they not, in getting juries to agree with them and get the criminal convictions on these cases, right?
Yes, they are. And to be fair to prosecutors, they say that they certainly look at more than just the triad. But these cases overall, nationally as well as locally, prosecutors have been very successful in securing convictions. In fact, the Washington Post and Northwestern University did a year-long study and published their results this year.
Pulled together a database on this.
Yes, pulled together a database of 1,800 cases that were actually resolved, shaken baby cases that were resolved across the country, and 1,600 of those cases actually resulted in convictions. The remaining cases, you had either charges dismissed or acquittals or what have you.
Now, I did want to bring up a couple of notorious San Diego cases here in recent years. Let's talk about Kenneth Marsh. Now, he was a caregiver. Girlfriend at the time was off at work, and he was watching the child here. And explain what happened there. And he spent 19 years in prison as a result of this.
Well, yes, he was convicted. I believe it was. I have to look at my dates here. The situation was where he was taking care, looking after his girlfriend's 2-year-old son. the child was injured, the child subsequently died, and Marsh was tried and convicted of second-degree murder. And so he was convicted of 15 years to life.
And his story was that the child had been up, if I recall, up on a couch in the back of furniture, up off the floor, had fallen, as I say, it was a raised stone hearth, and cracked his head.
Yes, that is exactly what he contended all along.
Always, and he could have gotten out of jail years earlier by simply saying, okay, I concede it, I need to get out of prison now, but he never did.
Absolutely, because he would not admit to having abused this child. He strongly asserted that he did not abuse this child, that this was an accident caused by a shortfall.
And we should give credit to current DA, who didn't prosecute this case originally, Bonnie Demanis, who said, okay, we will take another third-party look at this. It came back and said it very well could be reasonable doubt here. It could have certainly happened the way, and that's how he ultimately got out.
Yes, yes. So lawyers representing Mr. Marsh actually were able to find doctors who said that this was something that could have happened because of a pre-existing medical condition in combination with that shortfall. So basically it lent credence to what Marsh had been saying all along. Demanis agreed to have another expert, a forensic pathologist, look at the evidence again. That person determined that he or she, I don't remember which, could not determine that this was a case of abuse beyond a reasonable doubt.
All right, a few seconds left. Real quickly, is the climate changing? Are we seeing this kind of scrutiny change how these cases may be prosecuted?
Yes. In the sense that prosecutors and doctors have all told me that they are not relying solely on the triad, that they are looking at a range of other components of evidence.
And more reasonable doubt there.
Absolutely.
Okay, well, great stuff. We'll look for more on this very, very tragic situation. That does wrap up another week of stories at the KPBS Roundtable. I'd like to thank my guests, Liam Dillon, voice of San Diego, Lisa Halverstadt, also a voice of San Diego, and Dana Littlefield of the San Diego Union Tribune. A reminder, all the stories we discussed today are available on our website, kpbs.org. I'm Mark Sauer. Thanks for joining us today on the Roundtable.